Marcel here. And before I do a little bit of intro, if you randomly landed here, I have no idea what we're talking about today. We're going to go through a little bit more on content strategy for AI answers. There's been, I think, a ton of content out there on just like visibility within LLMs and just a lot of kind of trends and things. And we kind of felt like that's important, but I haven't seen a whole lot of content of people going through and actually talking about how to do the work that actually drives those results and actually makes an impact. And so what we're doing today is kind of open sourcing a lot of how we do things here at GrowthX, which is super fun. We've done this before, but before I keep going, a little bit of intro on myself. Actually, we'll pass it over to Jason to do a quick intro as well.
Yeah, sure. Super quick. My name's Jason. I run growth here at GrowthX, so easy to remember. Spend a lot of time working with our biggest customers on all the problems we're going to go over today, building engines, to create amazing content at scale, to build audiences, to drive revenue, signups, and everything in between. And I work with Marcel every day.
Yes. I met Jason at a dinner and immediately was like, I got to figure out a way to work with him. And then just so happened that he told me he was moving to my neighborhood. So that made it way, way, way easier. But all right. So really quickly about our journey. I know a lot of you probably already know my journey a bit and how we got here. So I'll go super quick here. But throughout my career, have been in a lot of fast growing companies. Just been lucky enough to be at a few that did really well, like HashiCorp, ServiceTitan, and Scale AI. And then before GrowthX, I was at a company called Deepgram, where I started to build a lot of these AI workflows that I'll talk about. But that's a little bit of my background. So I've seen a lot of different kind of hyper growth journeys of companies going from a very little revenue to billions and learn a lot in that process, right? So, but a little bit more about kind of how I got started was back at IBM. I just realized IBM was probably spending, I don't know, $1 billion a year in ads, which is insane to think about, and just marketing overall. And I always thought, why do brands not take some of that money and just become a media company and build distribution that way? And so I set out to prove that. I built a site called securityintelligence.com. Within the first year, it generated about 17 million in revenue from just a few $100,000 in investments, and won a B2B Best Website Award and things like that. And then it just became so high ROI. It was actually the highest ROI program at IBM, and actually stuck around for over 15 years. Just this year, they actually folded it back into IBM.com, but it kind of proved out the model. And so at HP, I built that model again, and pretty much throughout my career, I always done that, which was figure out ways for the companies I work for to operate more like a publisher. Fast forward a little bit, I joined Deepgram as CMO and started taking everything I had learned in that process throughout my 15 plus years of building that for multiple companies and building these organic growth engines. And then I started to build these AI workflows to just kind of reproduce a lot of my thought processes. And spent over 1,000 hours doing that. And then started hiring people that I like to call the experts in the loop, so editors, and to guide that process along. Today, I like to call them like the output bar raisers, right? But it worked amazingly. We published a few thousand pages, we 24x our traffic, and had a massive impact on revenue. We built distribution around that, and all of that without increasing marketing budgets. And so from that, I started to do a lot of workshops, just like similar to this. And funny enough, it was just pretty much a year ago, a little over a year ago, I just did a LinkedIn post saying, hey, this is what happened, this is what I did. And there was just so much interest in it. And long story short, these workshops started to happen. I did 3 of them. We had over 170 people come through, and that's how GrowthX got started. A lot of people started asking for, hey, can you help me with this? I don't want just the workflows. I don't want to just buy tools right now. I don't have the time to go build these workflows myself, but I also need help with the strategy. I need an expert in the loop, and I need the day-to-day execution as well, including that kind of last mile, right? Where teams are super, don't have a ton of capacity. And so we started saying yes, and that just kind of went from there. And today it's pretty wild. We're actually 70 employees, which is insane. We're working with over 50 brands that have been really amazing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we've just been super lucky and blessed to get to work with some of the best brands out there, and we kind of have to, we kind of get to have this massive variety of companies and personas and space and topics, and it's been so fun building. And so that's a little bit of background on us here at GrowthX. So with that, let's jump in a little bit on why is everyone freaking out about GEO? So for those who don't know, there's a lot of like little terminology out there, GEO, AEO, but we'll break that down. Today, I don't want to spend too much time on just like the technical terms or trying to break down every little kind of thing that people are tracking, but instead I'll cover it at a high level. And then I want to spend a ton of time on actually how we do the work, how we actually impact those numbers, right? And so I feel super lucky that like throughout my career, I always was the CMO or marketing leader. So, but now as a founder, I get to also be doing sales and talking to people. So, and I get to see people's reaction and hear what they're saying firsthand. And so I've had about 200 of these calls, if you will, in the last year, and it's just been pretty crazy how consistent what we're hearing is, right? Like, so first thing is some of the traffic, not all, but a lot of the traffic is disappearing faster than many brands are actually growing their traffic. And so some of the clicks, sometimes their most valuable clicks are going away, especially ever since the Shopify CEO's memo on being AI native. I feel like that is the number one thing I get asked is, hey, can you come talk to my team about being AI native? I don't know what that means. And I just know my CEO keeps saying that. And I need to tell him or her what we're doing about it. There's also this common trend around companies want to grow, but I rarely hear people saying, I want to buy more tools, right? They have a bunch of tools and just kind of this overwhelming amount of tools. And we get a lot of people coming to us saying, hey, I bought this tool or that tool, and then it ended up becoming 1 or 2 people's full-time job. And now we're constantly having to maintain this tool in order to get value out of it. And it's a lot of work, right? And then pretty consistently, no one wants to hire big teams anymore. I have not heard a single person that wants to hire a big team. And the ones that do have big teams are often saying, I wish I didn't have a big team and I wish my team would move faster. At the same time as well, almost consistently across everyone we talk to, their websites tend to be a mess and their teams have very little to no capacity at all, right? And then finally, many don't know how to do content right, or they're not sure how to do it and what to do about it. And many brands and many teams don't know exactly how to build distribution. So we'll cover that towards the end. And finally, the last few things are people, I think, and this is a common trend, I think, for the last few years, is paid is getting more and more saturated and more expensive, and it really doesn't scale, especially given the fact that a lot of companies are raising money and they're starting to kind of throw money at these paid channels. And then outbound just got completely flooded, right? And so the effectiveness of those channels are definitely diminishing, it seems. There's still exceptions here or there, so you can still get value, but certainly they are not going to scale forever if those are the only 2 channels or areas that you're investing in, right? And part of that is because there's so many new players in the space. And so we're hearing even from very well-established brands that it feels like every week there's a new AI this for their categories, right? And so that's creating all this noise in the market for brands. And so compound all of this massive shift is happening, right? And unless you've been living under a rock, this is not news to anyone, but just to kind of summarize some of the big kind of shifts that are happening. There's over 3 billion users every day using different AI tools and AI search. Overall, AI overview, Google finally kind of embraced, and it's getting more and more aggressive about implementing that across searches, including AI mode as well. ChatGPT users, Claude, and others like are growing super, super fast. And overall, traditional search, especially the clicks from traditional search and how many people are going towards search first, is dropping quite significantly, and at times in some categories way faster than people expected, right? So everybody probably knows this already, so that's no news. But that behavior, it feels like, especially in the last 3 months, started to change even faster than I think people realize. If you ask people at the beginning of this year, I don't think anyone would have thought that behavior was going to change this fast, right? And then what we're seeing both with our customers, with the market overall, is there are certain categories and certain types of queries where clicks are disappearing a lot faster, right? And so we've seen in certain categories anywhere from 15, and stats support this as well, anywhere from 15, and in some categories even 70% of clicks disappearing. And so a lot of companies, if that hasn't happened to them, they know it might. And if it has happened to them, then now they're trying to figure out what to do about it. But there's hope, I promise. And this is what I love, this math here, right? So imagine if even 70% of your clicks disappear, but 4.4, but the value of the ones that do come to your site are 4 times more valuable. It actually ends up being a net positive for many companies. And that's actually what we started to see, like where we've had customers where they haven't lost ranking, their traffic hasn't skyrocketed, but all of a sudden LLM referral starts to make up a higher and higher percentage of their traffic, and that converts way, way higher. They're also starting to see a lot more brand lift, and that branded traffic is the highest intent traffic. The game and the kind of the surface area where you kind of play the game a little bit has changed, but it all comes down to building trust at the end of the day. That's what we believe in, you know. And so the way to think about it is clicks might go away in some areas, but then the quality of your traffic when it does come in will be much, much higher, because the intent will be higher, and they already have had a lot of the information consumed before they get to you, you know. So I always like showing examples, right? So this is just one silly example, and we'll show a bunch of them, but this one is in a category for one of our customers, Monograph, and they're kind of an OS for architecture firms, right? And you know, historically, people most likely would go into search and just say, hey, software for architects. And this is a high intent search, obviously, right? But if you look at what's happening and why things are shifting so quickly, is because this experience is not great. You come in, you put that in, you got 3 sponsor links, then you have a bunch of tools here that are just kind of like shortcutted into the first fold of the search results, right? But because people tended to do these shorter queries, they're not explaining the full context of who they are, what they're doing, and what they're actually trying to solve for, right? Like the word software, it's really broad. It's like it can mean anything. And because of that, now all of a sudden you get hit up with like something like Procore, which is more of a construction tool, and you know, and then you get hit up with links to AutoCAD, which if you're an architect and you're not using AutoCAD, you're probably not an architect, right? Like, and it's probably at times not the right intent. And then you have to scroll down and kind of filter through so much, right? Like different links, different websites, and forums and whatnot, right? So overall, the burden is completely on the user, and the experience is just bad. And so when clicks are going away, they're not going away because the intent is going away. They're going away because the experience was so bad, and there's a much better experience, right? And so, so then what does that behavior start to look like in LLMs? And we all use LLMs every day, so this is not news. I just wanted to kind of showcase that a bit, right? But now all of a sudden you're giving more context. And in addition to a lot of these LLMs and AI search services having a lot of context on the users already, right? You might go and explain a lot more things. You might say, hey, I'm an architect for a small, medium, or medium-sized business in Boston. I'm really struggling to manage my projects and have financial projections. Can you help create a guide of what tools I could use to help my company? Right? Like that's a very specific context now. The likelihood of someone typing all of that in a search box was highly unlikely before, right? But now all of a sudden everything changes where these services might be pulling 20 up to even 200 links, in order to come up with an answer. And how you shape that becomes very, very different. But now imagine someone consuming this and reading this and saying, hey, Monograph, why architects like it. And, there's a specific dashboard. It lets you see different phases of projects, assign tasks, all of this. And you say, you know what? This actually looks really good. This is exactly what I was looking for. The price point looks good. Like I should probably look them up, right? The bottom line is AI is definitely growing, but how do you show up more? We're going to go through our entire process on the content strategy. Before we do that, I just wanted to cover some of the top points of, all the reports out there, all the best practices at a high level, and then dig in on how we apply that in the day-to-day, right? As far as like content strategy. And so, the way we kind of think about it, just to summarize, is some of the most impactful factors, although it's shifting daily, and it really varies from service to service, category to category. LLMs are rewarding content that is well-researched and well-attributed to reputable sources, that is comprehensive, well-organized, and brand reputation is making a huge impact. And I know that's one where it's a bit harder to influence. So later on, we'll talk a little bit about some of the things you can do to start influencing that. But other people mentioning your brand has a huge impact. Ability to stay like up to date and fresh. There's so many stats out there on how the percentage of search results that are just content from within the last 3 months. Then what we start to see is like, if you have a large footprint, let's say 2,000 pages, which some of our customers do, how could you possibly keep 2,000 pages updated every 3 months, right? It becomes almost impossible. And certainly when you start to add in like the right CTAs and cross-linking and fact-checking and things like that, it really becomes unmanageable. So we'll talk a little bit about those processes. And then different authority signals of like showing expertise, quoting experts, any kind of first-party data or research you've done, anything that's truly like information gain, where you're showing that you are the expert in this topic, having an author profile, things like that, the structure, and then ultimately like ability to easily understand the content and read it as well.
And just to jump in here a little bit, I feel like we're at a stage where it's like very early for GEO and AEO, and there's like a lot of tactics. But like for us, like we work with, a ton of customers. We publish probably hundreds of thousands of articles at this point. I saw some questions about, Scrunch, Evertune, Profound. We've worked with a bunch of them. And, right now there's a lot of tactics, but, we've kind of mapped out a couple ground truths that we think will kind of keep holding, while these things evolve. I think literally just yesterday, I think ChatGPT, hey, shared chats are being indexed. I'm pretty sure if it hasn't already happened, that will probably get removed very soon, and for us, those tactics, go away. And the things that remain, the first thing is basically everything is becoming more long tail and personal. I don't know if you guys can see that super close, but, almost every prompt you're typing into ChatGPT with research, if you actually look at the searches, they're a lot more personal than what a human would type. I think the average for Google, maybe is like 2 or 3 words, but for Perplexity, ChatGPT, it's much longer. So what that means is you need to kind of understand the customers, what their journeys are, and be just much more specific, to what they're trying to find. Second, you need to refresh more often. Marcel already mentioned, recency is a huge factor. Also, just like how you talk about your product. I mean, if you've looked at some citations, you probably notice like somebody asking, hey, how much does my product cost? And you see it, saying something that's totally wrong or off base. That's probably because it's citing an article you wrote 2 years ago. Sure, it ranks really well, but it's mentioning features that you no longer support and a price that's out of date. So, for companies that have been publishing content for years and years, good luck doing, a refresh of 2,000 articles every few months to keep up. You need kind of systems and machines to do that. And the third thing is you need better distribution. I think more true now than ever, it's not enough for you yourself on your website to talk about your brand. You need to make sure your community talks about it. You need to make sure publications talk about it. And essentially the internet that's being trained into these models and cited is mentioning, what you do and what problems you solve. And this one, again, I'm sure you've seen multiple stats everywhere. I think the truth of it is it's all samples. This one is for a fintech product. And you can see, product websites really important, but also important to be on Reddit, be on YouTube, be on Quora, and to be cited there. And the last truth, probably the most important, that I think, connects everything together with how we build our content engines is AI is really converging with value and not with SEO. Like, sure, right now it's using RAG, running searches, but even now you can see how what ranks number one for Google is not necessarily what gets cited and what shapes what the AI says. And you can see all these things that, in the SEO world, a lot of tactics. Hey, you can pay somebody for a backlink. Now with GEO, it's more aligned with just what good marketing is. It's like, hey, you should be where your community is on Reddit, engaging with them, talking about your product, trying to solve their problems. And that goes through almost every, tactic that you would do to optimize for SEO, from targeting keywords, how you structure your website, how you kind of optimize certain kind of meta descriptions, and also just, technical SEO with sitemaps. I think at the end of the day, what it aligns back to is you need to create better content, that solves problems and provides value. And I think what, Marcel is going to jump in for the rest of this call is how do you actually do that at scale, and how do you keep kind of pushing that bar higher and higher?
Yeah. And so think of what we just cover as a bit of just a primer, just in case anyone needed kind of that bit, like kind of high level primer. But now what I want to do is dig in a lot deeper into how we work and how we kind of start to craft this, what you call a winning strategy. And we're actually going to go super hands-on and show things and show examples and show how the process then drives the actual results, show how it gets cited and everything else, and we'll talk through. I see some of the questions on, top of funnel, bottom of funnel. And so we have examples on both ends that we'll show. So the first thing I would say is we have to get the inputs right. So when you think about how do we win and how do we build trust, gain visibility long term, is all about crafting the right strategy, and that starts with getting the right inputs. And so the first thing that we do when we start an engagement, or even before I started GrowthX, right? It was always starting with the research and audits. And I'll actually show you a couple of examples here. And then later on, we'll also share afterwards some of these prompts, some of these resources as well, and create like this full guide just to share with everyone. And everything here, by the way, we're trying to do it in a way that you don't need to work with us at all. We're trying to truly just show you how we work with customers so that others can actually replicate this, right? And so the first thing we do is, this is actually before I kick off, we go and do research. And what we're looking at are things like, hey, the origin story of the company, the reality of the business, what they actually do, their market position, the people. And later on, I'll show you an actual example live of us doing this, right? So this is just a prompt. And we then ask companies for all the useful resources that they might already have, right? Like whether it's personas, we might ingest calls and transcripts, anything around sales pitch, or recordings, pretty much examples of great content that they like. We try to ingest as much as possible, right? And then what we're doing is doing deep research, combining that with all this other kind of docs and context that we're getting from customers as well, right? And then we're going a little bit deeper and also starting to look at, hey, can we look at quotes and reviews of what people are saying about us in the market? What are they saying about our competitors? And I'll show some examples here. And then start to actually craft, who is actually resonating with my audience that is already publishing content as well, so we can start to learn what resonates with our audience, right? So think of this as like kind of the very first step. And a huge part of this is also starting to look at not just auditing your site and looking at the opportunities where there's huge gaps, but we start to look at all the direct and audience competitors, and also how people perceive those people, those competitors, and how they perceive your own brand. And think of this now as like what you're trying to do is seek to understand and go a lot deeper, as opposed to come at it from a bias already, like I know what to do here, right? And I guess that's one benefit of trying to take an outsider perspective, even if you've been at the same company for a minute. So that you can kind of hit this reset. We call it a strategy sprint, and I would encourage any company that's thinking through this to go through this actually as if it was a sprint, right? And so by doing that, what we're doing is just learning to see what's working, what's not working. What are your mindshare competitors doing? What are your direct competitors doing? What's doing well? And we start to set up a lot of this LLM tracking as well based on some of this research. But really, we're seeking to understand, right? And then from there, we start the discovery process. And I think one part that's really interesting is that I've been a CMO and a marketing leader for a while, and the times where I would join a company and we didn't do something like this, it happened more often than not, right? And so I actually would encourage anyone that is thinking through their strategy to actually go through this process. A lot of what we do here is we start with, hey, what's the context of your company? What's driving any urgency, right? Like, what are customers saying about you? Who are the decision makers, within your company, and what do they care about? Can you go talk to them, right? And then what's the daily reality for your customers? Are there triggers that are causing that? What in their day-to-day is making their life miserable? What are some of the choices they make when they're choosing to buy something like what you provide? And there's all of that. So we break it down into the company context, the customer insight, your market position, the current state of things, and also look into what's limiting your growth, and how we can look into different bottlenecks, internal friction, and what success looks like, right, in the next 6 months plus. And then all of this allows us to just gain this deeper understanding. And I'll show you here in a second how then we take all this research, all this context, and we create artifacts. And then we take all this discovery and deep dive, and we use it to continue to refine those artifacts that then can be used to not only shape our strategy, but also used in how we scale our content strategy, and actually can be used in a lot of different ways, right? And so we're compiling all of this and moving as quickly as possible, so that you're not stuck for months, right? Like thinking through discovery and analyzing. You want to do this as quickly as possible and as intensely as possible. So doing as many deep dives as possible. So then from there, the next step is let's create artifacts. And there's this concept of context engineering now that's becoming more and more popular, if you will. And I know this is hard to see, so I'll actually go in and show an instance here of this company context. But what we're doing here is creating this one single source of truth, right? So with context engineering, think of it as the big picture. If you hire a really smart intern who is insanely overconfident in everything, but very willing to do to work really hard and has infinite time on their hand, that that is a lot of kind of how to think about AI today, right? And if you do that, like what you want to do is not just say, hey, let me give you this task and just let me just describe this task. You want to give it this person the big picture, right? And so that's how we think about artifacts. Artifacts are these living documents that we can, all your teams can use. If you're using things like Claude Project, you can use this. And it just allows us to, everyone to be operating, and including LLMs, to be operating from the same big picture and the same source of truth, right? And so in this case, when it comes to content strategy, we have several artifacts, but the three that we've seen make the biggest impact, and we'll share examples, and we'll also share after this templates and prompts on how to generate this so that you can generate your own as well, right? But they are the company context, and I'll show you one live here in a second. They are the audience personas. And so that's going deep into the audiences that we serve. And the last one is writing guidelines, right? So those are the three foundational ones. There are so many others that we create along the way. They're very like company specific, or, product deep dives, features, things like that. But if you have these three nailed, what we see is anyone in your team can get so much more value faster from any AI that they're using, right? Cool. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit into some of these, and then we're going to go in and look at how we create one from scratch. So I'll show you a live one that we created, right? So defining your audience is so important, because everything we're doing and everything we believe in is having this audience first mindset to your content strategy and everything you do. And the reason for that is I know a lot of people are saying, hey, just optimize for LLMs, optimize for machines. And that's great, but you have to remember these models are trained on human preference data too, right? And so no matter what, the way to think about it is, how do you go and create value for your audience that you want to serve? And in order to do that, you just need to have a much, much, much deeper understanding of that audience. And what are some ways we do that? And so the first thing is we do all that company research, and then we created this company context document, right? So now once you have that, you can put that into a Claude project or anything you're using. And now we want to start to do is start to kind of untangle, if you will, or go deeper into the one single persona that we've identified that matters to you, right? So for instance, in this case, one of our customers, engine.com, right? It might be the overwhelm operations manager. And so from there, a lot of what we're doing is thinking through, what is the job description for this person look like, right? In this case, it might be an operations manager at a small business kind of construction company, right? And what are the kind of skills this person have? What is that person's background usually? What is their career trajectory? What are different jobs to be done that they have to perform, or work products and deliverables? And what's expected of them? And what are some of the metrics or KPIs, or how do they get promoted, or potentially what are the things that they can do wrong and get fired? Who do they work with? Who do they work for? Who do they interact with internally and externally? All of that, what you're doing is mapping this person within the context of their job. And if you're in the consumer space, you're mapping this person within the context of their lives, and narrowing it within the context that matters about what you do. So we'll show you both examples, one on the consumer side and one on the B2B side as well, right? So that's kind of the, if you will, the mechanics of their day-to-day within the context that's relevant here, right? And then on the other side is the it's the inside of kind of how they're feeling, if you will, right? What they're thinking, what they're kind of how they're processing everything. And so that's their pain points and frustrations. What are their fears and uncertainties? What are things that will build trust with that audience and that person? And what are things that will annoy the hell out of them? And what do they truly care about within the context of either their job or their day-to-day life? right? And so now what you have is this like massive map of information, and you're just researching this. And LLMs are amazing at this as well. But if you can enrich this with actual interviews and deep dives with customers that represent or people within this audience that you're representing, that's even better. So, for instance, like one of our customers, they're in the women's supplement space in healthcare, right? And they had done all this interview while they're developing those supplements in the last year. So we were able to ingest a lot of that, and that was gold, right? But even if you don't have that, what you can do is take any sales call or any discovery call you have in a Gong or anything like that, and you can actually process it to extract quotes that are more relevant to these types of questions that you're trying to come up with and insights, right? But even if you don't do this, there's so many ways you can do it with Perplexity Deep Research and other tools to start to understand that, right? And so now there's almost like no excuses to not do this work. Even if you don't have a product marketer, even if don't have a background in product marketing, there's no excuse, because these tools just help accelerate the time to insights so much faster, right? Okay. Then the next artifact that we talk about is the writing guideline, and just kind of how we do calibration as well. And what we want to try to figure out is, how do we want to sound like? And I think this is where so many companies get this wrong, and they also don't know how to create AI-ready artifacts that actually make an impact, right? And so the way to think about it is, if you're ever dealt with an executive that you're trying to post something or publish something, and they're, spending 10 hours nitpicking every sentence of an output, right? And instead, what we want to do is put all that effort, all that time into making sure we're aligned up front on what we want to sound like and why. And the way to do that is not only to have descriptions, you actually need to show more than tell, and you need to show good and bad examples. And that makes the biggest difference in everything you do. And then once you have that for how you want to sound on, let's say, your website, you can then create variations of that for different channels, for different people in your company, and it makes it a lot easier to adapt, right? So in this case, right, Engine, they're blue collar directness, anti-corporate skepticism, operational realism, and respectful confidence. Okay, those are cool words, but what the F does that mean, right? and so what we do then is just say, okay, let's break down those different adjectives, and let's show what a spectrum of these adjectives almost can look like, and where in that spectrum do we want to be, right? This is just a fun exercise. There's multiple ways you can do this with LLMs, and I'll show you here in just a second how we do this from end to end, right? And then what we do is take something we already wrote. And so in this case, here's an article they had already written, and let's just break out one paragraph, just one piece here. And then let's apply this writing guideline to that paragraph, and then explain why we did it that way. And so that what that allows you to do is just get alignment a lot faster, right? Internally, often it's really hard for people to agree on what a company should sound like. And in all of this, like in my experiences in the past, when we start working with companies, we ask if they have anything like this, and normally they'll send like some kind of brand guidelines with like 3 or 4 adjectives and no examples of writing, or they'll send an example of a tagline or something, right? And none of that is actually relevant for longer form content and what we're doing here, and none of that will perform as well as these kind of writing guidelines, right? And so what does that look like as a final product then? And keep in mind, all of these are living documents, right? And the reason I'm spending so much time on these artifacts is because in the last 12 months, it's probably been one of the biggest step change improvements in everything we've done, is getting these right inputs, iterating a lot and fast on these artifacts, and treating these artifacts as living documents, right? So if anyone has used Cursor, Augment Code, or any of these, or Claude Code, or any of these coding tools, right, what you'll notice is, as you're working on a project, it will start to update these files called like claude.md, for example, right? Or cursor rules. And this is kind of what we're doing here, right? What we're doing is like defining the context of the project, defining the context of everything in the rules and guidelines, right? But then as you're creating content, as you're going through, as you're getting feedback, then you also need to go back and continue to iterate that. So then the guidelines, it goes through all these different sections that we have. And again, I'll send a sample. I'll also send a template and prompts we've used later. You have voice and tone, structure and format, writing style, language choice, practical analogies and metaphors. You don't need to follow this perfectly, but this is just one example, audience approach, product positioning, and then a few other things to kind of apply on top of this. All right, so with that, let's look at how we created these artifacts for a customer, and hopefully that helps a little bit. So, all right, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to jump into Perplexity. And a lot of these we have workflows for, but I wanted to show you all how to do this in tools that cost, $20 to $100 pretty much, right? And just to show that it's not about the tools at all anymore. So the first thing here is the prompt that I'm going to share with everyone, which is, hey, complete research for this company. One quick thing is sometimes companies will have names. There's multiple companies with the same name. So what I like to do is make sure you have a domain in there in addition to the company name, just to make it super clear who it is that you're like what company you're working with. By the way, these kinds of research and artifacts work amazing as well as a way to prospect accounts to go target. So this is not only internally, you can replicate this and do it to seek a deeper understanding of target accounts, right? Okay, so then what we're going through is the origin story. Part of the origin story is how did this company start and what are the founder story, early funding, initial customers. And the reason it's important is companies become a reflection of their founders and their journey. And so if you can understand that a little bit, you start to understand the essence, what they stand for, why they stand for that, and how they got to this point, right? Then you want to look at their business reality and, are there any kind of big kind of scenario things? What do they actually do? And for all of these, feel free to kind of modify, go deeper. Obviously, if you're in a consumer space, it's going to look different than if you're in B2B. If you're in a highly regulated space, that's going to look different too. You're going to want to go a lot deeper into that, right? And what you're looking at is just mapping out their products, their features, what their features enable, the product evolution and major pivots. In this case, Engine actually has gone through used to be called Hotel Engine and something else before. So they've gone through some evolutions. Who are their main competitors? How do they stack against that? And later on, we also do deeper dives on the competitive landscape as well. Their advantages, target customers, use cases, all of these are just initial things. And what you're trying to do is just set the initial big picture. This is the beginning, not the end of the research, right? And then starting to dig a little bit deeper into the customer reality, the people in the company as well, any problems, the future, recent context. Again, this is just an example. There's so much more you can do here, right? So now you have all of this here, and it's actually really, really good and gives you so much context, so much valuable information that surprisingly you don't get only from one website or one page. And you definitely are not going to get from these kind of data enrichment services. You're certainly not going to get from without doing deep research. By the way, all of this is in deep research mode. And I tend to prefer Perplexity quite a bit, especially for speed. ChatGPT has been all over the place when it comes to deep research, and sometimes it goes way too deep, But I'll show an example of another service that you can do this with as well, right? Okay, cool. So now we set that, and amazing context. A quick thing here that you can do as well, by the way, is export and download it as a markdown file. And the reason it's great is LLMs love Markdown files. Markdown is just like an easy way to have text and kind of the formatting and everything else. And it's easier for LLMs to process Markdown than it is a PDF or an actual doc. And so what I tend to do is download these Markdown files. And another quick hack too here, or not hack, but thing you can do is like, if you're using something like Cursor or something like that, you know, internally, like you can create folders anywhere in your computer. And literally, even if you're not technical, right, you can just throw some of these things into a folder. And then now you can, you know, use Claude code within Cursor and just kind of interact with those files pretty easily as well. Or you can do it within the context of a Claude project. You know, I prefer Claude personally, but, you know, same thing applies to ChatGPT, right? And so it's just so much easier to download it as an MD file. And even if you don't have that option in whatever service you're using, you can always copy it and then create a new file in Cursor or wherever you're working, or like a kind of like a VS Code, and just throw it in there and then save it as a .md file. Okay. Next, you can do something like research 100 quotes and reviews from customers on how they use this company and why they love it. Again, like this is shortcutting so much already, and you start to get real quotes. Obviously, these are starting points of prompts. Iterate with it. It's your company. You should spend a lot more time on this, right? But now what we're going to do later on is we're going to take this initial research, create an artifact, and then start to use these additional research steps to enrich and refine the artifacts, right, for company context. And this is going to give us like a much richer kind of experience. But then later on, we're creating audience profiles. And when we're writing guidelines, now you have more context in the language that your customers actually use it in your space, and how they describe things and what they love about you, you know? So yeah. Okay. So, okay. So then it will separate it into different sections and whatnot. So this is super, super useful. And before I go into authors and kind of why we're doing this, I'll show you one other service that, or tool, I guess, that we've been using and testing quite a bit, which is Manus. And so Manus is really cool. So I just copied and pasted just to show you the same prompt over here. And it actually did a pretty insane amount of research. And so you can kind of see it's going through a bunch of different pages, and then what it did is like it started to create kind of like research notes, and it did a bunch of things. But what's really cool about this is it goes insanely wide and for a very, very long time, right? And so what I found is that it's really not great at writing. And so the presentation layer is pretty poor, but it will go a lot deeper than any other service out there and use a lot more compute, right? And so just to give you a specific example here on what it resulted in, it does insert a lot of like things are just like not worth doing. But I'll show you in the process where sometimes it might be okay. In worst case scenario, you can spin up 2 projects, and one using Perplexity and this research, and another one using only this. And we do have internally our own fact checker. And one of the reasons we built that is honestly, none of these services actually do any kind of fact checking. And so it becomes really hard to actually know what's made up and not. And they do hallucinate, right? But we're still going to have a lot of editorial reviews of all this content and everything we're doing. And so like it tends to be filter out later on. But you can see it goes way, 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 way deeper, cites way more sources, you know, and honestly, like there's a fine line here where if you try, you might be overwhelming a context window too much. You don't want to have 100 pages. It won't do as well. And so there's kind of like a fine line. These models can handle quite a bit of context, but also there's diminishing returns if you start to throw so much at it, right? So anyways, this is just an option here. Okay, so now Let's go through and let me see if I have this here. Okay, so now what we did is we pasted one of our, in this case, one of our workflows that does a lot more steps, and then also the Perplexity step I just showed you, right? And I know this looks kind of crazy, but literally it's like one sentence prompts, right? And this kind of sounds almost like a little bit counterintuitive. And so I'll show you two examples of doing this, but one is like we're putting just that research and just pasting it over, and this is in a project, right? So later on I can show you that project and kind of what I have in this project is one of our customers' data grid. We had created this, so I just put 3 examples of a final output, and so then I can create a similar one for other customers, based on that one, right? So now it has this context here, and it was pretty good already. Like on first shot, it was like I think even pretty close to what we want to do. One thing to keep in mind is I had already primed a certain language and style for it from the beginning, so it's already written in a way that is starting to get close to what I wanted, right? And then later on, I refine it. But you can see most business travel is broken by design. You book a hotel on one flight, on one site, flights on another, and cars somewhere else. Each has different cancellation policies. None of them talk to your expense systems. And you can see how it's already written in a gray, in a way that's already pretty much resonating. And you can kind of see this whole artifact. What's really interesting, same thing here. You can download it as a markdown when you get it to a good place. Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep us going here. And we're going to share a lot of these templates and processes. Give us probably until early next week to kind of package it all up. But then what we do from here is take any of the docs that I mentioned earlier, where there might be your internal docs, there might be like competitive research, like for instance, this one is like competitors' bad reviews, right? It can be like brand perception, it can be some of the quotes and testimonials that I just showed you. This is literally a copy and paste of what I showed you, right? And now like you're iterating on that, right? And shaping it. There's multiple ways you can do this. You can do this in Cursor as well, with Claude Code as well, and Claude projects are just as good as well, right? And then from here, like we just kept doing this and enriching it and tweaking, and this is a lot of the work that's necessary, right? You're going to get feedback, but then one of the biggest step changes now is, then we get to this point where it's like, okay, now this is good enough, right? And then what we're doing is now create an audience personas document, and then it did that, right? And honestly, like even at first shot, we refined this quite a bit, but it was pretty spot on already. And so I said this before, but keep in mind, these are all starting points. And as you go and you start to create content and start to build these workflows, and you start to have, comments back from folks in your team or your editors, it really is, you have to keep refreshing this. You have to keep editing. You have to keep working on this. This is a living document. This is your, context of your entire project, right? But if you have this and now it's aligned, now this is truly a source of truth for your whole teams. And what we do within our teams is we have, projects and in our systems as well, where I'll show you where all this context is there and it's always up to date as we refresh it, right? But then so many marketing teams are just using Claude and ChatGPT, and they're just copy and pasting prompts. They're not putting any company descriptions, or they're writing single sentence descriptions. So anyways, this allows you to, if you all you did after this call, right, after this webinar and workshop, is do these artifacts with your teams and create a Claude project and dump them there and make sure all your teams use that, I guarantee you, it would probably already make a massive difference. And the reason I know this is because as we're developing these for customers, many of them are starting to take these artifacts that we generate And they are doing that, and they're telling us how much better the work that they're doing is because it has all this context. And that's why I'm spending so much time on this. Okay, cool. I hope it's useful. I'm trying to watch the chat too along the way. But okay, so now we developed the audience personas in the template that I showed you, and then what we're doing next is I'll go back to the Perplexity research, but this is a little hack that I found to define your writing guidelines. Is I'm a huge fan of people like Jason Fried and their writing style, and I always like, as I'm trying to be a better writer, I'm not a great writer, but as I try to do that, I've always tried to find things that I can aspire to. And because of that, part of my process was creating archetypes based of people writing styles, right? Like, for instance, like, hey, write in Paul Graham style, write in Jason Fried style, write in Adam Grant style, or whatever it might be, right? So then what I did from there was like, okay, how can we do that for, but cast a wider net than only people I know, right? Because I am a dad of a 2-year-old and a founder, so I don't have a ton of time to to go read new authors and discover new authors. But and so this was, and we have a better prompt. So when we did this one, it was like not even a great prompt. But who are 30 authors, writers, personalities, or leaders with a unique voice and style that either write for the same audience as this company or would appeal to that audience? For each, include 5 quotes, a description of their style, and an archetype name. And what you're going to see here is like shockingly good, in my opinion. And it's pretty cool. Like, okay, so for instance, Seth, okay, the permission marketer, key quotes, and then you have the hustling truth teller and the network architect. These are all like, what you're trying to do is just like cast a wider net. So, and then read through these and figure out, based on the context you have in your company and what you think will resonate with your audience, who you think would be a good match for that, right? But we're not only doing one person. So what we're trying to do is learn from multiple archetypes and profiles and then bring them together in a unique way with the context of your business, right? So keep in mind, like, we did this after we did the company context and all that research, including all the reviews and quotes from your customers. And we're doing this after we already did the audience profile and got it to a decent place, right? So you've done those 2 foundations. So now, like, I wouldn't start here is what I would say. So sometimes, like, you'll find things that are really good, and sometimes there might be things that are not quite there, right? In this case, there's a lot of people that weren't really appealing to a blue collar audience in this case, right? And so because of that, like, I did another pass, which was more around finding, saying, hey, people that write for blue collar audiences, because all the previous ones were more like people that write for like business audiences, and then I found some really good ones, and so it was really interesting, and then from there I picked the ones that I liked the best, and I said, okay, cool, let's analyze the following writers, authors, and details. And so Jason Fried, James Clear, and like these 2 other authors. And then what we're doing is looking at their background, their voice, tone, and style, the motivations, and why this person resonates with their audience. And then we're going a lot deeper on different quotes from them, like 50 quotes, an example of their writing, and then a little bit on how to replicate their writing. You can go a lot deeper than this as well, by the way. But this is just, again, all of this, by the way, in deep research mode, right? So if you have to do it in deep research mode. But it's really cool. Like, for instance, like, until you start making something, your brilliant idea is just that, an idea. Like, it just really captures the essence of these people. And so that's it. And then from there, you can literally copy and paste this or download the MD file. And then let's go back here to what we were doing. And then I kind of mix these 3 And um, and then like I kind of played around with a couple of different ones, and that's how actually I found these other two. I said, hey, here's a list of a bunch of them. Which ones do you think will resonate the most? And then now let's write a writing guideline doc based on the authors and writers below. Don't mention them. I even typo here and use the example I gave it, right? You're probably noticing like my prompts are pretty shitty. And that's kind of a little bit of a trend, which is like the prompts actually don't make that much of a difference anymore. They can in scenarios, but when you're working within like projects that have like ton of great context already, it's more about the work that happens once you get the first version and now you're iterating, right? And anyways, like so this is the high level. I'll stop here, but I do want to show what this looks like in let me see here. Let me grab engine in our systems here with the artifacts, right? So then and then we'll get back to the rest of the presentation, but like this is where all this company context is, right? And what's cool about this is like this is within our platform, but like you know and you can do this in Claude Code, or Claude projects, right? Like what you could do is then say, for instance, like let's say you're adapting this and you want to say, make this relevant to construction audience only. And now like you have all this context and you're pulling all these artifacts. So it's like you have artifacts, but then you can also use the context of the artifacts to then shape the artifacts themselves, right? And use the latest models and things like that, and so for our teams, like we do this quite a bit where like then they can accept the changes and then we can learn from that work, so I'm just going to reject all. But what you see is like in some customers where we might be 10, 20 versions in, and but then you can start to really adapt to different personas as well, right? Like it can be industry specific and could be pretty much anything. So for instance here, like construction, now we adapted that to construction. And then later on, I'll show you how we build like specific pipelines and workflows with editors in the loop, but that are specific to a subset of your personas, right? Like, or a adaptation of the base that you had of these artifacts, right?
We had some questions. Might be a good place to like stop a little bit.
Yeah.
Just one just now. I think everyone's just curious about this platform you're showing, and like, would you be able to share more about what it's even doing and what it's for?
Our platform?
Yeah, Atlas.
Yeah.
We're spending.
I think we're going to spend a lot more time in our platform. And honestly, like the reason I'm not even talking about it because I don't want this to be a sales kind of pitch kind of thing. It's our internal platform that we use to deliver our services, and we're eventually going to expose it very soon. But as we go through this process, what I'm hoping is every single thing I'm showing can be replicated with, $20 tools, if you will. And what I want to show is how we can do amazing work and scale amazing work with, any tool. And it's not about the tools, the process and the strategy matters so much more. And then I think the companies that are really want to scale it out, like they're the ones that maybe need help, right? And obviously we love partnering. So okay, so now the next step here is going to be mapping the right opportunities. This is so critical because now you have all this context. So everything you do from now on just is already like at a much easier place because as you're doing all of this and you're starting to map, you're starting to do audit, like you have this artifacts that are already at a really good place and they're only going to get better. So the way we approach this is it's kind of from three angles, okay? So think of this as like one persona that you have, right? And if you're serving like, if you have, let's say 3 personas across 10 industries, right? Like start somewhere. You can start a little bit more generic. You can pick one. Don't try to do, 30 versions of this. You're just gonna get paralyzed and do this for 2 months and not actually get anything out and not show any progress. There's 3 angles we look at. The first one is like what competitors are covering. And when we say competitors, we're talking about mindshare competitors and direct competitors. Think of it as there might be an online magazine, publication, or someone that doesn't compete with you directly, but that might be covering, let's say, the travel space. Okay, so for instance, like take Engine, even they don't compete directly with TripAdvisor, but there might be some topics where TripAdvisor is ranking and taking the mind share of the from the people they want to serve. The other angle is, what does your audience care about? And the reason we believe in audience first approach to content strategy is because that's way more predictive of what people are going to search in LLMs where you don't have volume. Like you don't have volume of how many people are searching about these topics in ChatGPT. You don't have that. What you have is, hey, can you monitor these queries for me and tell me how often I show up and who shows up and what is cited and what the answers are? But you have no way to know the volume, right? And it's highly unlikely that ChatGPT is going to open up any of that data like Google did, right? That's not their business model. There's probably eventually going to be ways for companies to be able to predict that, maybe through watching people in the browser, what they're doing, or finding tricky ways to estimate volume and things like that. But it's pretty difficult. So the way we kind of think about it is like start with the audience first, and how many people are within your audience, within your TAM. And if you don't, just use Manus or something like that and do a TAM analysis, right? You can do that in 20 minutes. So because of that, you know how many people are in your audience. Now you've defined your audience really well from the perspective of your business, right? So now you can start to map what it is that they actually care about. And that's a little bit of the topics discovery on the left side. This is, by the way, not meant to be comprehensive or every little thing. This is just like top things, right? And so on one end, you have, terminology, definitions, tools, jobs to be done, templates, like regulations, comparisons, things like that. But what you're looking at is going a little bit further on, hey, here I am an operations manager at a construction company. What are, and then you go back to a lot of the audience profile things that we did, right? Where, what are the questions I have related to my job? What's my, what are my work deliverables? What are my jobs to be done? And all of that, those are all topics that people are going to care about. And then as you're researching those topics, go explore almost like kind of a playground. And what you'll see is like, it's going to start to untangle things, right? Like maybe you're researching some kind of terminology, and then as you're going through that, it's like, oh, it's for a construction crew. Oh, what are the different phases of construction projects? Oh, that's kind of interesting, blah, 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 right? And then you can start to kind of really map this out. And I'll show you like an actual live example of how we've done this. And then the last piece is not features. It is not product features. It is, what does your solution enable or solves, right? If you exist and somebody's paying you money for something, it has to be to solve a pain point or to enable them to do something that's important to them, ideally. Otherwise, you're probably going to go out of business. But and so because of that, you can focus on that, right? Like if you are, I had the example of one of our customers, Monograph earlier, they're OS for small to medium-sized architecture firms, right? And so their solution enables them, architects have these really long project cycles, and to track the financial, projections of these really long projects that might take 3 years from design to completion, and they might not get paid all up front, right? So then it's really hard to track across 3 years, if a project is losing money or not, and the different costs, and then people's rates change and things like that, right? So there's very specific things that product enables. And then within that is you can start to really map it out and then start to create topic clusters that I'll show you. Now, keep in mind, there's a little trick here. So if you're in a space and category that didn't exist 6 months ago, a year ago, the likelihood of the competitive mindshare piece being relevant is less, right? And so you do need to start with persona first or audience first. Let me give an example. We're working with a company in the LLM security space. LLM security was not a thing. Prompt injecting was not a thing that long ago, right? And so there's a lot of these topics that there's just not a lot of information out there. And so then because of that, you need to rely on discovery and doing deep dives with these people, these experts and the people in the space even more, because there's not like 100 sites talking about these topics. You might need to go and transcribe YouTube videos, podcasts, do interviews, and there's services out there you can pay to actually interview people, within a space and get this information if you don't have. And then what we do is like start to audit existing pages as well. And so this is mostly for companies that have large footprint. We've worked with companies that had literally no blog when we started, nothing, like just literally just a few pages on their site. But most companies have something already, right? And so what we do is we don't have time to go through the whole like demo of exactly how we do it. And again, like I'm showing you how to do this without any tools pretty much. Like you can buy SEMrush, Ahrefs and do all of this, right? And so what we do is like you go into a SEMrush like tool and you can look at the keyword list and then export that keyword list based on a certain section of your site. And then correlate all of this and aggregate all this information to then understand like, hey, and again, this is mostly SEO side because there is no way to estimate it with LLMs, right? But we'll show you how that all connects later. But so then what we're doing is saying, hey, here's a page on your site and there's all this information about this page, but this page maybe ranks for, let's say, 100 keywords. Then you can go and aggregate those 100 keywords and figure out the volume, the average difficulty, and a bunch of other trends. And then you can estimate, hey, if I was in the top rank for these keywords, I should be able to get, let's say, 10% of these clicks, right? And then you can look at what is the actual clicks you're getting or impressions you're getting. And then you can see the delta and look at that from that opportunity, right? Then the next angle is what pages are losing traffic or decreasing in terms of engagement or impressions or click-through, right? And then also looking at the substance of these pages as well. Thin content, outdated content, bad or no CTAs, missing or bad links, lack of image and media, right? Like a lot of that is, there's a lot of ways to automate this. We can't cover in this meeting, but now you come at it from, hey, I have 1,000 pages on the site and these are the ones that we want to go after and prioritize, right? And so now you like started to map all this out, and then what we start to do is take all that research we did and put it into what we call a content OS. So this is kind of like a database, if you will, right? So think of it as like you have pages and URLs, you have assignments / opportunities, and you have keywords and queries, but then you also have, call it tags, right? So think of these as tags. And so you're going to tag everything within these of how you see it in your space. In this case, they see it in terms of group type, personas, and industries, right? So then what that allows us to do is like, as we start to create what we call topic clusters, it will make it a lot easier to, and I thought I had topic clusters here, but yeah, here you go. Okay, so you can start to tag every single assignment based on what matters to you, whether it's personas, industries, group type, funnel, journey stage, all kinds of things, right? And the reason for that is like, you need to have some order to the madness. You can't just go and say, hey, let me go do 1,000 things, spray and play. And all of this is going to be really relevant later on when you think about how you want to structure all this content within your site to create, topical relevance. The way I like to think about it is you're building a knowledge graph for each one of the personas and audiences you are serving, right? And so because of that, you have these kind of branches and nodes, and you want to create, almost like these little cohorts, right? You don't want it to all be this massive knowledge graph that's just a flat thing. You want to have enough relevance within these topics and correlate it. And I can give you an example of a site that does this really well, which is healthline.com later, that does this really well, where they pick these topics and then they have subtopics as they start to expand, and you're trying to correlate and cross-link between things. And so in order to do that, you need to do that at the planning phase, which is here, right? both for net new content and existing content, and understanding where does that fit within the ecosystem of defining your entire audience and everything they care about, right? Does that make sense? Hopefully. Hope this is helpful. Okay, so then when people say, hey, what's your content strategy? Usually most people, what they want to see is something like this. It's like, hey, what is the big picture? But then like, what are the topic clusters and how do they relate to our audience and the stages of our business or the journey or the funnel or whatever, right? And then what we're doing here is defining these clusters at a very high level and then starting to come up with different assignments for each one of these clusters, and then start to manage which ones we want to prioritize weekly and daily, and start to put those place those bets down. From here, you are essentially creating what does that workflow at the bigger level workflow look like? In other words, like, hey, create a backlog of assignments and opportunities, both new and existing, and then start to prioritize based on these clusters, which ones you want to actually start to consider and start to produce and start to create, and then create a review process to ensure quality, right? So anyone that has done content at any point, like you should do something like this. It's pretty simple, right? It's work, but it's important. And then what I'm showing here is kind of these relevance scores. And so we built workflows that actually make this process of assignment creation a lot easier. And I'll show you an actual assignment here. And what we're doing is we're looking at the overall score, but also the personas fit, the search intent match, the direct product service alignment, and then we call it lead generation conversion value, but it's like essentially the intent or likelihood that, you know, from this topic, they would want to buy something, right? And so those are just some ways, like develop your own, but if there's some way for you to start to score and have a framework to understand how to score these opportunities in addition to quantifying these opportunities, right? Okay, cool. So before I actually jump into this, I want to show it live, something, and then show you actually examples as well. So this is like our like just a sample pipeline that we would create for a customer or something like that, you know. And so the first step we go through is creating the assignment, which is what I mentioned. And so what that does, and this is our like essentially like the way we do this is like you have the inputs and the outputs, and of course like we had like a 404. But what we're doing here is setting the direction. There's all this context that I showed you earlier from the artifacts, and it's going through this whole process, and I'll show the workflows as well, but it's coming back with an entire brief, right? So if you think about like a brief before, when I was running this years ago for different publications, this would take so much time. And so we try to break it down into different processes as we go into production. So the first step of the process is an assignment brief. And then from there is research. Then it's the planning phase. Then it's actually drafting. Then it's backchecking and a bunch of post-processing, right? And I can show a bunch of different examples. But this is at a high level. It goes through a lot of different things. It's also starting to propose a content structure. And later on, I can share some prompts that will allow us to that will allow you to replicate this regardless of what you're using, right? Then, like what we have here is the research phase, and so like what we're doing is breaking the research down into questions, right? So instead of just saying, hey, can you research the topic of construction company expenses? Instead, what we want to do is break it down into questions. So the first question is, what are the different types of expenses commonly incurred by construction companies, specifically focusing on direct, indirect, and overhead costs, right? Like that's a very specific question. And the reason it's this specific is because we fed all this context before, right? Like here. And so it's not only doing deep research, it's breaking it down to questions. By the way, these are the questions that we can then modify to track
within these LLM visibility tools, right? And then I'll show you examples there. So and then what it's doing, and this is really, really important, is highly researched and highly cited. And this is going to be really important because later on, as you're creating this content, you want it to be, you want it to reference any stats and anything you're doing, right? And so anyways, so there's like indirect cost, overhead cost, and then it goes into the next question, and it's a pretty long research brief. And you can see there's tables, there's like summaries, it's quite well structured, it's really well cited. And in this case, for example, this is actually an interesting one. This is one of their competitors, but we can actually filter by that as well. So later on, like you can set, hey, I don't want you to do research on any of these domains, for instance, right? And then from there, like we'll go into this kind of like outline plan, where it's going to refine the outline a little bit and a little bit of the plan. And this is where, again, like all of these things, like an editor can come and modify, and they're guiding that process along. Then you have like the actual article draft and the where it's going to go through. And I think the part that's like really, really interesting with this is like, because our artifacts are already so good, this is already arriving at a much better starting point that then an editor doesn't need to spend as much time getting it to a really high quality place because it's in the right language, and it kind of captures the essence of what that audience cares about and how to resonate with that audience, And then there's a bunch of others. There's different ones where we actually do different processes, like ones that are like medical review and things like that. But we do fact checking as well. So it breaks down into chunks, and then from there, fact checks each step in each passage and ensures that there's accuracy, right? There are ways you can do this. And so the simplest way to do it is you take all of this, and I actually think something like Cursor or Claude Code would do a much better job at this, but you can throw it into a markdown file, and you can ask it to break it down into chunks and then extract the passages. And then you can take that and run it into a deep research tool and say, for each passage, provide 3 statements or 3 sources, if you will, that support this, and then from there, you can then throw it back into the project that you're using or whatever tool you're using and say, now that I fact checked this, can you correct for these and keep the same flow style and everything else? So that's roughly what our workflow does. And then the internal linking is really, really important. A lot of what we're doing is looking at like relevance of so we look at your sitemap and other pages that are already ranking, and we look for common patterns of, what topics are related to what we're writing and things like that. So for instance, like all the essentials that keep project costs moving, like there's a lot of the cross-linking as well as like from that. And then anyways, I'll leave it at this, but hopefully people can kind of see the steps here. I know this is not in the detail of the prompts, and we can share more of that, but that's the high level. The workflows behind this, right, are a way to kind of think about it is like before, I think the simplistic version was you go into ChatGPT, there's a prompt, and then there's an output. And you say, write me an article, right? Then over time, I think we started getting smarter. There's a lot of these low-code tools. People started building some basic workflows, right? And you have an input and then a workflow, which is a set of steps that can be LLM steps, or they can pull other things, right? And then an output. And that's an overly simplistic view. Then a lot of what we kind of walked through was like, how do you create this really good context, and then take these inputs that are in, and then have a lot of different workflows that then generate this output. And then like what we try to do from there is say, hey, not only that, we should also be querying from custom knowledge bases that are already filtered down to what's important to you. But even more importantly than that, we need expert intervention throughout, not just in architecting the workflows and the whole big picture process, and not only in getting the right inputs and creating these and crafting these contexts and artifacts into deciding what is the right strategy and what opportunities you go tackle and what those inputs are, but also guiding that process along every step of the way, but not in a vacuum where you have to copy and paste things over to a ChatGPT kind of experience, right? Like you want to have a context-aware environment. And the way to do that is to have these artifacts. And again, like you can do this in a cloud project and Cursor, like whatever you're using that's kind of like a low cost type of tool. This will work. Obviously, if you're trying to do times 2,000, then you should probably talk to us. But you know, if you're doing this at a lower scale, like this works, and it will save you a ton of time. And so I wanted to give a very specific example here of like our process for this customer example engine, right? Where we went through that whole process I showed you. And this one is construction company expenses, right? This was actually a refresh article as well. And then what's really interesting is pretty quickly, it already started to show up in AI answers, right? And so top expense categories for construction companies. And then like you look at Perplexity, it's the #1 cited. And so like these are just some examples of like when you have the right process, what we're starting to see is and because you have all this empathy and all this context on the persona you're solving for, those longer tail kind of queries, we're seeing these pages show up a lot faster in both AI answers, ChatGPT, sometimes Perplexity, although Perplexity tends to take a lot longer, right? Okay, so from here, what I want to do is just use one more example because I've been mentioning Engine a lot. And I think one of our earliest customers was Ramp, and they've been in the news because they just raised a round, and I love them. And it's funny because it's been exactly 1 year from when we first met with them and they became a customer, which was like really, really cool. And it's been a blast to work with them. So I wanted to show you a bunch of different examples of things we've done for a company like Ramp. It's funny because like there are multiple visibility tools out there that have shown this stuff as if they created the content for them. And so I wanted to show the actual workflows that we use to create this content for them, and not the visibility tools that brag about the results. And so, you know, at the end of the day, like, if you're ever evaluating a tool of anything and they say, hey, we help increase visibility, you should ask them for this kind of level of work and like, show me your process, show me your workflows, show me where you draft this strategy and show me how you do it. Show me how you edit it, where are the experts in the loop driving this process along, and what work do you do? And if you don't do that and the work is on you, you are the one driving the visibility, you know, and making that impact. And they are helping you measure that visibility, which is a very critical piece, right? But it's a very different thing to measure visibility than actually doing the work that drives that impact. So we've done a lot of these articles, right? Like for instance, like how long do ACH transfers take? And the part that's really interesting here, it all goes back to those artifacts, but also understanding those personas. So let's say a finance manager at a startup, right? What are some of the questions that person will have? What are some of the frustrations they have? And we just see so much success where, because they have this brand reputation already, but also we've been scaling this. We've done literally thousands of different pages, both editorial, programmatic, and I'll show you a bunch of them. They're consistently showing in both citations for these types of queries, as well as AI answer, as well as organic. And so the goal here is like, how do you do it in a way where the quality and the content engine you're building increases the chances quite significantly of you showing up everywhere. And so that regardless of how the behavior is changing, you have the best shot possible compared to at least your competitors, right? So another example here is we created these vendor pages for Ramp as well, which is actually pretty cool. I can show a live version of this really quickly. It's a playbook that's been done before, but I think what's really, really unique about this is if you go into any of these, there is proprietary, or not proprietary, but primary data that only Ramp has. And so there's this kind of like information gain, if you will, and it's unique because they are sharing something unique to their business. And so we built these workflows where we do is like we ingest this data And then we use our workflows to analyze the data as well, and then embed this in within these articles, and then also do all the publishing and QA for them as well, right? Like, and so this is really cool. Like, so that's the piece where, like, if you're doing these graphs and like the amount of work that it goes into even within their CMS of just staging it, QAing, and doing all these things, like that's a lot of work, right? Like tools won't do that. So figure out ways that you can hire freelancers if you want to, but like you want to make sure people are helping you in that last mile, because it's not just creating a workflow and forgetting. There's a lot of work that goes into like creating a beautiful experience, and then what we started to do from there is then go into and start to create these alternatives, right? And then, so this is like an index page of the alternatives of those. And then from there, you can then go into like specific ones as well, right? And so I'll go back to the presentation. And what's really cool with this is like, they're already showing for instance, like I just used this sample query last night, when OpenAI is better choice than XAI, and then you can see them being cited, first organic search result as well, and then showing up an AI overview. And then you can see like you're kind of creating and correlating this content, and it's well structured, it's beautiful, it's a nice experience, it's clean, right? We've also done a lot of programmatic plays that, I personally think you have to be very careful with programmatic. And, I've seen companies do it where they're creating pages that are not really related to what they do. In this case, the thought process here is, if you have enough authority, hey, what are the times where people need an expense card or will think about things that Ramp does, is when they're traveling. And when they're traveling, what do they want to know? They want to know what the per diem is for that state and that city. And so we created all these pages and enrich them, but also with a beautiful experience that is interactive, right? And so with nice graphics and everything else. And it has tables, right? And so this is not just like a thing you can just quickly do on ChatGPT and call it a day, or, use a low-code tool and do this times 1,000. There's a lot more thought process and strategy, and the team at Ramp is amazing. They drive a lot of the strategy as well. And so it's like, it's been a lot of fun to work with them for the last year. This is another one, which is the expense category, where, what are the times where people think about, like, what is something that Ramp does, which is automatically sort through receipts, but also categorize expenses. And so there's this catalog that we help them enrich of all these different expense categories and how to think about, hey, what category is office furniture? And what's really cool is like, it's super consistent again, right? Like a lot of these, it shows up in AI overviews, it's cited, it's top search result, it shows up in ChatGPT, it shows up in Perplexity, and it's pretty consistent. And so like you're seeing, like, when you're consistent with this and you do it at scale, but you also, do all the other things right, it really, really helps. And so we have all these ways to just maintain quality that are like super, super critical, right? And then I want to show you just one more quick example. I know we're almost running out of time, so I'll go super fast. This is a super recent one, customer augment code. But I just want to show you an example. So we created a brand new section of their site. So they had /blog, and we created /guides for them, right? And we went through the same process I showed you. Obviously, like, there was a lot of work of understanding what they do. Think about augment code as a better version of Cursor for complex code bases and for enterprise teams, and way better at planning and kind of having short-term and long-term memory as well, which is really important when you have larger code bases, right? And so like the process here that we took, right, was like all of these steps. I won't go through them, but these are all the steps of the different workflows that I was showing you, right? Like it goes through, it chunks things, parallelizes them, creates the assignments, it fact checks, it does so much of that. But because it's like using a lot of LLMs too throughout the process, we're seeing a much faster pace because it has the right artifacts, it has the right strategy. It is really effing good content because you have amazing editors in the loop guiding this and reviewing every single word and editing, but you're able to scale and move a lot faster. So this is an example, 13 best AI coding tools for complex enterprise code bases. And we published on the 29th of July. So you can see it's recent and this is real data. And you can see the prompt we're monitoring here is how to get AI coding tools to understand my entire code base. And this is because that was actually one of the questions in our research process. And within a day, it got cited with a strong position and positive sentiment, and it got citation, which is insane. Like this, like we've seen cases where we'll publish something, and this is a brand new section of their site. They don't have crazy domain authority, and within a day, they're getting cited. And then you look at this, and this is like super, super fascinating, right? Look at what some of the language here. So this is a language from the article. It says, unlike tools that rely on limited context window, Augment's context engine processes up to 500,000 files simultaneously, mapping architectural patterns across blah, 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 right? And then look at the AI overview. and it's citing that, and it's actually like mentioning the same things, right? And so like you can see here, it's kind of hard to read here, but it says tools for deep code understanding. Solutions like Augment Code process large volumes of code, mapping architectural patterns and relationships between files and services. It's like almost verbatim this paragraph, and because of that, it actually put Augment Code as the #1 recommendation on this query. And you can see here, this is our workflow, right? That does the deep research. And this is the question: how do existing AI coding tools compare in terms of understanding? Obviously, it didn't have any information on Augment Code, but because we had all this other data, the custom knowledge base, all this artifacts, then it was able to understand what was already out there and then write a version that placed Augment Code in a positive light, right? And now in ChatGPT, they're also #2 already. And this is within 24 hours. Right. So I wanted to use a really recent example here because it's super relevant. And so the net here is nothing can guarantee that you're going to get cited and get visibility, but there's all these things we can do to dramatically increase the odds, right? And many of them go back to first principles of audience first and serving your audience and creating amazing value for your audience. Like, do you really want to read a piece of content that's 3 years old? I don't, because the world's changing so much. I don't even remember what I ate last week, right? Like, like go back to those first principles. And so just to refresh, right? A lot of the processes to back this up are around like creating content that's well researched and attributed. It's comprehensive and valuable. How do you build this brand reputation, keep that content up to date, show a lot of these authority signals where you're showing your expertise, you're talking about things that are technical or specific, you have authors, the content is well structured, and how you come about with this structure is also through really great research, and it's easy to read and understand because it's in the language that your audience wants to read, because that's how we created those artifacts, right? And so I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes flying through this, and we'll probably do another one if folks are interested on more about going from content and content strategy and publishing at scale to then turning that into subscribers and driving conversions. But the high level is, if you're creating all this content and all the surface area and doing all these things, and now you're starting to see visibility and traffic, and you're not actually matching all that work that we did early on the content OS to the journey and the intent behind it, and then matching that to irresistible, really high value offers for your audience, you're going to be losing out on so much and your ability to accelerate their journey to eventually monetize that audience, right? And so it's an example. Webstack's one of our customers as well. They have a newsletter. They have then these CTAs that we're constantly testing, right? So essentially what we've done is we've created over 300 pieces of content for them in the last year. And then we mapped all of those into solution areas for them. And also, as they're creating offers, like this one is around, hey, explore 7 examples of designs and strategies of great B2B websites. They know this offer converts really well. And so they have 2 logical next steps that they're converting to. You see, none of these are get a demo, right? What they're trying to do is de-anonymize their audience. They're coming to them by being a subscriber so that they build that into distribution. They are driving them to solution pages to then understand that signal further. and then they are driving to offers that they know work. They're not trying a new offer on a new page with no traffic, right? Like you're trying to match it to your audience. And then the beauty of building distribution, I don't really know why companies don't do this more often. Like this is just a newsletter we built for Augment just last week. Like 30 to 40% open rates, 10% click-through rate. And it's like, build that distribution, find ways to capture emails through really great offers, but then actually put that to work. But don't do it in a way that's just about your products, right? We use Beehive, they're a great platform. And then what you want to start to do is start to build this thought leadership. And the reason you're doing that is because one, places like YouTube and others are getting cited and pull quite a bit, but also you start to kind of spread everything you're doing, and it goes beyond only content, like written content. But then you can start to take the transcripts from these pieces and then enrich everything else you do, which also makes that piece of content perform even better. But then you can start to also repurpose your thought leadership into offers. Like for instance, like what I'm doing right now, we're going to turn this around and we're going to create videos out of it. We're going to create guides and templates and offers, right? And then there's a piece that you just can't forget. I personally think most of PR is semi-dead. And this is the new PR, which is one of our customers, Surge AI. We got them on 20 VC. We got mentions on My First Million. And obviously it wasn't only because of the work we're doing. We're just helping here, but like a lot of this, like you can see, it's like makes a huge difference because as you're getting cited or you're getting mentioned in these publications, those publications are getting pulled and it increases your chances of showing up. You just have to do a little bit of the hustle, right? Like this is me DMing somebody saying, hey, we should have the CEO Surge on My First Million. Like, it's just like a little bit of hustle. And so if you do decide to do PR, make sure your PR company or whoever you work with, like can actually do this hustle. But also there's nothing that says you can't just do this hustle internally in your own, with your own resources. Just build networks and reach out to people. And then obviously figure out like kind of a founder-led story or genuine stories from your leaders and how to start to build that social presence in a way that's just genuine. And don't try to use AI a bunch for this. Like just literally just start with like being genuine and writing and just coming across as you really are. And then the last thing I'll say here is like, that's one piece, but you should take a step back. And every single time when I build programs that work, like when I was at Scale AI or DeepGram, I really thought of it as programs in a bigger flywheel that where every single aspect of what I'm doing has to reinforce everything. And so I'll probably do another session where I'll talk about kind of the engine that we're building on our end for GrowthX itself, right? But this is just one example. This is not ours, where you can think about like, how does everything relate and reinforces each other's and drives to the next thing? And if you have that really thought out, then your teams know where to plug in and how to plug in, and you can start somewhere, and then everything you do is going to get reinforced over time. And then the last thing, there's a lot of tools out there. I as an investor at Koala, so I guess now I'm an investor in Cursor, but there's Common Room now. They got bought out by Cursor, but Common Room now is like the default, if you will, if you were using Koala. And there's RB2B. There's a bunch of other tools out there. But what I would say is like capture the right signals and then act on them, right? Like if you're getting a web visit, if someone is engaging with your social post, if like those are all signals that you can start to figure out what companies are from, what do they do, and start to act on them. Like, and again, like that's a whole other kind of, workshop that we can do. And the big picture here is not just content for content's sake. What we're trying to do is build a trust funnel, an authority funnel, right? And that works differently. That's not linear. That's about like every single time someone interacts with you, interacts with your brand, interacts with your website, with your content, reads something about your content or gains value, that's how their opinion of you is shaped and the level of trust. If you kind of, put up with me for the last 2 hours almost, like I hopefully showed a little bit of expertise and influenced you a little bit, but hopefully I deliver enough value that you trust, what we're doing slightly more. And even if you never buy from us, that's not the intent. The goal is like maybe one day somebody will ask you and you say, oh, you should talk to GrowthX. And that's what we're seeing. And we haven't, spent almost any money in marketing, and we're on track to hit 15 million this year in revenue, and all organically. And so it's like we're kind of living proof that this stuff works as well, And so, okay. So last thing, ROI model, and kind of what to measure. I told you all I wouldn't spend too much time on this because there's tons of different sessions from amazing tools and players out there on talking about visibility. But this is just data from a customer where what we're seeing is in the right categories and when they're doing the right things, LLM referral is now 60% of organic traffic. So think of it as like for every 10 organic visits, they're now getting 6 LLM referrals on top of that. But the really interesting thing is that this is right in line with some of the research, 3 to 5 times higher conversion on this traffic. And it kind of makes sense, right? I've run this number in every company I work for. So try this. Take your organic traffic and break out, if you can, your organic traffic between branded and unbranded, and look at conversions. And then look at what is the web visit to demo request or sign up for that cohort versus all the non-branded traffic or direct traffic. And what you see, and what I've seen before, is up to a 7x delta. So what that means is like one person searching for your brand by name is the equivalent of 7 people that don't know who you are arriving at your site. And so the same thing happens here where, one person that interacts with you and learns about you through LLMs and AI search, when they do eventually come to you, they're much more likely to be higher intent and already have like a positive notion of you, assuming the mentions were positive, right? And so anyways, super quickly, how we think about measurement. There's kind of 5 things here. The first one is foundation. Everybody talks about this, but it still matters. Your site has to be good, easy to navigate, pay attention to all the vitals. Is it getting indexed? Like all of that. It's like, hey, I'm not getting indexed on this thing. And it's like, I can't even find it as a user. So obviously machines are also not going to think this is important, right? And then, or if the experience is just really shitty and ugly, right? And then you want to try to get to really commit to a cadence of activity, articles published, pages refresh, and just get quality activity out and outputs out. Because the way to think about it is like shots on goal and opportunities to learn. If you're taking 5 shots on goal a month, that's only 5 opportunities to learn. And so you're not going to learn fast enough, right? But you don't want to compromise volume for quality. And so you got to figure out ways to do both, right? And then reach and visibility, obviously now it's not only reach, not only impressions and clicks and ranking, it's also brand presence, citations. There's tons of great tools out there as well. And then engagement is so important now, because what you're trying to predict is like, did you deliver on the promise that your content was going to deliver on? And the people that did land on your page, are they actually consuming that content, getting to the bottom, or they're bouncing? And then you can go and iterate on that content to improve the quality, right? And then conversion, think about conversion as next logical step. No one shows up and says, hey, like, I've never heard of you. Now I'm ready to write a big check. So what you want to do is figure out, like, based on the intent of that surface area, that page, for example, right? How does that page match to an intent? And how does that intent map to where in the journey they are? And then based on that, what is the next logical step and next best logical offer? And then what is, and how likely are they to perform that, and how can you increase your chances of doing that, right? And continue to build distribution there. And so that's pretty much it. There's amazing tools. We've partnered with tools like Scrunch and others. We're ingesting a bunch of different data as well. But what we found, one of the biggest things we found is like all of these tools work fundamentally the same, and all of them, you're going to get garbage results if your queries suck. And if your queries are not based on a content OS and a strategy and a deep understanding of your audience. And most importantly, you won't be able to move those numbers intentionally if you don't have the whole strategy, the experts, and the engine to actually go execute on this systematically day in and day out, every single day, right? And then the last thing I'll say is we built this ROI calculator as well. So if you're trying to prove this out for companies, we can open source this as well. But all it is like thinking about brand lift and a bunch of other factors. And so with that, I'll shut up because we only have 5 minutes. I hope this is helpful. I know it's a lot, but we hopefully genuinely just want to help people. And so I don't know if anyone's still here watching, but hopefully they're
still 200 plus. Okay, so I wrote down a couple questions. Everyone just keep typing more. I'll start with the like high level ones. I mean, you already showed it with the ROI calculator, but like if you were to digest how you would pitch what we're describing to kind of convince your team to do that, what would that be? And I think the part for me that's important is, tracking, sure, but we're really advocating for this, high quality type of content, that isn't just trying to game some tactic.
Yeah.
Why should companies do that?
I think it goes back to just human principles of people want to do business with people they trust or brands they trust. And the way to build trust is by creating value, by helping them do something, providing valuable information, and over time building a deeper relationship with those people, right? And at the core and the foundation of that, you need substance, and content is substance. So if you have no substance, you have no content. And if you have no content, you have no opportunity to build trust with your audiences. And now more than ever, I think brands need to think of themselves as media companies and publishers, and leaders inside those companies should think of themselves more as creators rather than, people that make a bunch of decisions behind closed doors and never stick their head out and talk to people, So that's kind of how I think about it. And those principles have not changed. The behavior has changed. How people discover information has changed. But if you're delivering value, you're building trust. And the only way to deliver value is actually know your shit and have something valuable to say, And so if I sat here and no, none of this was valuable, this would actually like destroy trust with you all, right? Like, so hopefully like, that's kind of the bottom line. And I guess if companies don't have a lot of substance, they should probably figure that out first before even doing this,
Cool. That's awesome. I mean, the rest of the questions are a little bit more kind of in the weeds of building workflows. So I'll go through as many as we can there. I think one question was, what's the difference between knowledge base and just kind of context for a model?
Yeah, so think of the context as like kind of your rules and guidelines. It's a bit more fixed. Think of it as like cursor rules or like your writing guidelines kind of we showed. And then knowledge bases are what you don't want to do is let's say there's a customer that we have in the supplement space, right? And they require us to only use reputable medical sources. But if you use SERP, or if you are scraping random pages, or even if you're using like Perplexity Deep Research, those services and APIs don't have great ways to filter those sources, right? Like, so what you don't want to do is like, as you're creating these contents and building these pipelines and things, like you don't want to be on the spot trying to fetch that information every time. What you probably want to have is more of like a filtered database, right? We did one in the DUI space a bit back, and it was the same thing. We had to go crawl a bunch of government sites and find the right PDFs and then store that in one place and then query that, For instance, if you're mentioning products and your product's really complex, one of our companies that we work with, like Webflow and Strappy, we had to go and store their docs into a knowledge base, in order to be able to use that as a source of truth. So when you're fact checking, you can fact check against the knowledge base versus the entire web, right? Then there's additional things like the way you process documents. Like sometimes you need to extract higher signal from a lot of noise. And so you want to have a lot of that stored, documents, transcripts, and things like that. And so those are kind of like the use cases of why you need it. And then also sometimes like that information is just in a format that is not easily accessible. For instance, like what someone says, minute 37 of a video on YouTube is not easily accessible. So you might need to extract that and put it in a way that is more relevant, so that is more easily accessible within your processes, So those are just some of the common examples of that.
Cool. I mean, I think we're right on time. I think there's a ton of questions just on building these things, so we'll probably have another session. What do you say?
Yeah. My only ask here is we'll reach out. We'll love any feedback, but also like thoughts on things you want us to cover more next. This company started because of a workshop and it changed my life, and we have this amazing company now, and I get to work with amazing companies and amazing people like Jason and others, and it was all started with a workshop. And so we just fundamentally want to continue to do that and deliver value in a genuine way. And I hope we did that today a little bit. And so thank you all so much. And have an amazing, amazing weekend. And I'm going to go catch up on sleep later today. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Everyone.